Prepare for a landing, Brad.
Okay.
In a 40G gravity atmosphere, strange thing happens to man's body and mind. Barry Sullivan and Norma Bengell take you into the most fantastic science fiction adventure ever filmed.
Emergency! Emergency! Conditions desperate. Little chance of survival. Help us.
Mark, look!
What have you got?
The Elliot.
Bert, get me a fix on this right now. Wes, Brad, controls.
Planet of the vampires. Harboring a form of life worse than death. Planet of the bloodless. Creatures who take men's bodies, but attack like vampires.
I'll tell you this, if there are any intelligent creatures on this planet, they're our enemies.
In this outer space world, the living dead try to escape into life.
Salas.
No, just his body. And I'm just one of many beings on this planet. And we're fighting to survive. It's imperative that our race continue to exist. We arranged for several of you to kill each other so that we could take over your bodies. You are our last chance.
No, never. We'll all of us give up our lives to save our own race.
Okay, hi everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Wild Wild Planet. I am Adrian Smith, and I am joined once again
Hold on,
by
Adrian.
Rod.
Adrian,
Yes?
he called the podcast Wild Wild Planet.
I think I'll probably keep that in. Welcome everybody. We're actually called Wild Wild Podcast, but I'm thinking about Wild Wild Planet because that's a film that we've got coming up very shortly. That's really funny. Yes, my mind just keeps going to that. And why not? It's a great movie. But it's not the film we're talking about today. Although I think this film, today's film, and Wild Wild Planet were in production, or at least pre-production, post-production, around the same time. There's a little bit of crossover. So yeah, that's really funny. Thank you for pointing that out.
Well, that's okay. I know, listening back to previous episodes, I have done ridiculously stupid misstatements myself. Where I think instead of Martin and Lewis, I said Rowan and Martin, which is something completely different. So it doesn't matter.
That's fine. Well, thank you. So this is my co-host Rod, who is here to pick me up on things that I get wrong
and to make mistakes of my own.
And it's something we all do. And it gives listeners something to get cross about, so that's fine.
Anything to generate interest. There we go.
Yeah, exactly. How are you today, Rod?
I'm doing pretty well.
Excellent. You've got lots of exciting Blu-ray related projects that you can't really tell us about in the pipeline.
Well, there are. There's at least one coming near the end of this year that I can't talk about quite yet. Of course. It is common knowledge that Troy Gwynn, my podcasting partner, and I have done a commentary track for Tombs of the Blind Dead for Synapse here in the States, and that's going to be coming out, I'm thinking, later this year, sometime in 2021. I'm not privy to the release schedule.
Synapse like to take their time, so who knows?
Yes, but that is quite all right. There are a few other commentary tracks on the horizon as well. That will involve me once again talking about the films of Jess Franco with various other people. So that's on the horizon. That's something to look forward to, at least for me. If you enjoy commentary tracks with my voice, then you can look forward to them as well.
Yeah, that's very good. And in my other podcast, Second Features, we've actually just been invited, my co-host Laura and I, to do a commentary track for a what you might describe as a cult British horror film.
Excellent.
So that's our first one. So I will be coming to you offline, not during the podcast, but I'll be coming to you for commentary advice.
Be very nervous. Just be terrified the entire... No, I'm kidding.
Okay, yeah, that'd be good. Just hear me panicking all the way through. But yeah, so that's an interesting world to be in. I'm also writing a few booklets for upcoming Blu-rays and yeah, so we're both managing to spend most of our spare time just going on in some way, in some form, about old films.
What a shock that we would do this now for about another film. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like as if we aren't already doing it enough. Here we are talking about old films. And but today's movie, so I talked about a season is Italiani nello spazio, which is Italians in space, and the title of that season does of course relate to today's film, which is, I'm going to talk about that more in a moment, but the Italian title of today's film is Terrore nello spazio, or Terror in Space, but it is of course better known to English-speaking audiences as
Planet of the Vampires.
Yeah. Now, I don't know about you, but I haven't really spotted any vampires in this movie.
No. And as a matter of fact, if I had not been prepared by reading about this film long before I got to see it, the absence of bloodsuckers would have been quite a problem for me. But the fact that that's the choice that AIP went with for an American title is, I mean, I understand it to a degree, and there's a way to justify it within the story, but at the same time, there are better titles.
Yeah. So actually, I've got a thing. I'm using Tim Lucas's book again on Mario Bava, because Planet of Vampires is is classic Mario Bava science fiction. Mario Bava does science fiction very differently from Antonio Margheriti, as we'll see when we'll perhaps make more of a comparison when we do get to Wild Wild Planet. Very different kinds of films. But Mario Bava was very interested in doing a science fiction film, and he brought this story. So the film Planet of the Vampires, or Terrore nello spazio, is based on a short story that Mario Bava found in a magazine called Una notte di 21... Let me start again. Called Una notte di 21 ore, which means one night of 21 hours, or a night of 21 hours. And so he'd read this short story about this crew of this spaceship who crashed on an alien planet, and they have to stand guard all night, but the night lasts, of course, 21 hours, and they all gradually get killed off, and it's all very weird. And that was the story that he took to this producer, Fulvio Lucisano. And this producer had, I believe, co-production arrangements with a Spanish company and also AIP. So Mario Bava took the story to him and said, I want to make this film and call it The Shadow World. So he commissioned a script by two Italian writers. I had to write this all down. I read through Tim's chapter, and then I've actually just written this out to make sense of it.
Good idea.
So here I go. So it was translated into English and sent to AIP, who sent it to their European guy, Deke Hayward, who was based in London, but he was overseeing British and European production. So Deke Hayward didn't like that script and demanded a rewrite, so they gave it to Ib Melchior. Now, Ib Melchior, he's somebody perhaps you're more familiar with than I am, but I believe he's been responsible for some pretty well-known cult movies.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, just before this, he was known for having written a successful film. I'm not sure how profitable it was, but Robinson Crusoe on Mars, which came out in '64, which is a great little movie. But he'd also been involved in some other movies of different levels of quality, shall we say. Angry Red Planet, which is one that I have a lot of joy in, and he'd crafted the English language screenplay for Reptilicus, which you can enjoy that movie on whatever level you want to, but I do love it. And he went on to make a little movie called The Time Travelers as well, which I think is a lot of fun. But the fact that you would call Ib Melchior in to do rewrites on this, or to try to make a script out of this story is not a shock. He was definitely seen as somebody you could count on to get, quote unquote, get science fiction, and to be able to translate it into something visual for the screen.
And he seems to be so well trusted by Sam Arkoff at AIP that apparently they paid him up front before he'd even written anything.
When you know anything about AIP, when you know anything about AIP at all, and I do highly recommend reading Sam Arkoff's book about his life and career. The fact that they paid him money up front will tell you that they really must have liked this guy a lot.
Yeah. So Ib Melchior, he wrote this draft synopsis for his version of the story, and he called it The Haunted World. Now that might sound a little bit familiar to anybody who knows Mario Bava's films. So they couldn't call it The Haunted World. And then Sam Arkoff started calling it Haunted Planet. And then the final draft of Ib Melchior's original script was called Warlords of the Outlaw Planet, which is a great name.
Which is a great name for a different kind of film.
Yeah, I don't know what film that is, but it's not this one. So he sends this script back to Italy. Mario Bava sees this script, gives Ib Melchior loads of praise and says how great it is. But then he also gives it to an Italian writer, Alberto Bevilacqua, who then rewrites it completely and calls it, for the first time, we get the title Terrore nello spazio, or Terror in Space. So then Sam Arkoff finds out that the script has been changed again. So he sends Deke Hayward from London to Rome to go and figure out what's going on. Deke Hayward talks about this, how he spent most of his time in Rome with Bava, just going to restaurants and drinking wine.
Yes.
Which is what you do when you go to Rome, I think. So that's fair enough. And the Italian script featured a lot more nudity. They were trying to make it a bit more of an adult film than Deke Hayward was happy with. So he kept trying to take the nudity back out, which it appears that he did very successfly. So then that script was then called The Outlaw Planet. So we still got that bit. Then they went back to The Haunted Planet. Then Ib Melchior took that script and wrote it in English again and called it Outlaw Planet, then Warlords of the Outlaw Planet, and then Warlords of Outer Space, which again, great title, but not this film at all. So then it became Planet of Terror, then it was called Terror in Space, then they shot it under the title Terrore nello spazio, then AIP watched it in Rome and decided that they wanted to call it Planet of Blood, and then just a few weeks later they released it as Planet of the Vampires. So it went through quite a lot of script changes, and apparently when they were shooting they still hadn't decided on what they wanted the end of the film to be, and we'll get to that in the plot summary. But the original ending of the short story is very different to what Ib Melchior wrote, but then Bava didn't like what Ib Melchior wrote, so they came up with a compromise, but this was after they'd started shooting. But also, according to so I had to look at the BFI database to see what they had on Planet of the Vampires, the British Film Institute, and according to their database, the film was also known at various points as Beyond the Sky and Space Mutants.
Oh.
I know.
Well, out of all these titles, just from not trying to create your own, but just out of the ones that we know were attached to the film at different times, which is your preferred title? Because it'll always, unfortunately, in my mind, be Planet of the Vampires, but I do not consider that to be the perfect title for the film.
I mean, I like Terror in Space, but you could argue that really they're not in space; they're on an actual planet. So maybe it needs to reflect that a bit more. So maybe Planet of Terror, although that sounds like one of Roger Corman's 1980s films.
Yeah, but this being the 60s, at least it would have, it wouldn't have felt that way then, at least. So
I think Haunted Planet is probably the most accurate title.
That to me seems to be the title that I think I cannot believe that they missed the chance to have such a commercial, in my opinion, a commercial title, a sellable title as Haunted Planet. It just seems like a perfect first of all, it really does describe the story.
Yes.
In that, the way things play out with the ghostly possessions and the horror elements built within this science fiction story. It's just it seems like the perfect title to me.
And it was released by AIP on a double bill with Die Monster Die.
After they had claimed that they weren't going to be doing double features anymore, which is an odd occurrence. It shows how. I don't know if that's definitely what was going on there, but it's just like, did they not trust either of those films to like carry themselves alone at the theater? It's bizarre.
Yeah. Tim Lucas makes the observation, this isn't my observation, but obviously Die Monster Die is based on the Lovecraft story, The Colour Out of Space, and Colour Out of Space would also make a great title for Planet of the Vampires.
It would have been a pretty good title if they decided to copy it.
But
that's true.
They missed a trick. They could have called this one Haunted Planet, and then they could have put it on a double bill with Haunted Palace.
Oh, you're right. You are correct. That would have been a good double feature bill. But this is true.
So Haunted Planet is probably the most accurate and evocative of what's actually going on in the film. But I do like the fact that the costume design for this film is fabulous.
Yes,
and they do have those high collars, and which looks like it's based on the classic Dracula cape. So there's a kind of suggestion that our space crew, maybe they're the vampires in some way. I don't know.
Well, that's an interesting idea. I've always loved those black outfits.
No, they're amazing.
And they look. What I like about them is they seem every time I watch this movie, they seem perfectly in keeping with what you think would be worn by a crew of a spacecraft in the future. Yeah. But at the same time, they also look really, really cool. In other words, they're not just they don't seem like exactly the right kind of design, but they also seem like something that just is extraordinarily neat, as something that really fits within the aesthetic that they were going for. And then as the movie goes along and things get creepier and creepier, having them clothed in these black outfits just continues to add visually to the creepy factor. And also, it's a very smart design considering how often those black outfits have to stand out against a multicolored alien backdrop. So,
well, there is a weird moment when they get changed for no reason into orange jumpsuits.
Oh yeah, and it turns out there was a reason visually.
Yeah, but it doesn't really quite make sense that they would just randomly get changed for one scene and then hop back into the black suits again. But yeah, if I had the money, I would commission a costume designer to make me one of these things so I could wear it to parties. I think it's amazing.
You're a very strange person, Adrian.
Thank you.
If no one has ever told you that before.
So this film is an Italian, Spanish, and American co-production, and that's kind of reflected in the cast. We could talk a little bit about the cast. And it was shot at Cinecittà Studios. Now, Cinecittà, the biggest, I believe they still are the biggest film studio in the world in terms of studio space. It was just vast. Which is interesting. Obviously, this film is so small in its budget, and most of the set that you're looking at is miniatures being reflected in mirrors and all kinds of clever things it was doing. So it must have been shot in the tiniest soundstage at Cinecittà. I was lucky enough a few years ago to go to Cinecittà Studios and have a tour, and it was like one of the best days of my life. It was so cool to walk around Cinecittà and just imagine all of the great films that have come out of that place, including this one, but obviously just hundreds and hundreds. So many of those movies that you know and love from Italy were shot, or at least edited, or the score was recorded at Cinecittà. So yeah, that was pretty exciting. They took us to a soundstage which has been renamed the Fellini stage because it was Fellini's favourite soundstage. And I noticed in the floor that there was a big panel, and I asked them, and they mentioned that it was basically there's a swimming pool underneath. They can fill it up with water. So then I put two and two together in my head, and I said, "Is this the studio where they shot Caligula?" Because I don't know how well you know Caligula, but there's a big sequence with a swimming pool, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that was in here." So and it was just such a surreal moment that I'm standing in the room
where porn was shot. No, I'm kidding.
Where that happened, amongst many other classics. So that was pretty exciting. But anyway, I love Italy a lot. And I've probably mentioned that before, and that's partly my motivation for doing this podcast. So,
of course,
any excuse. On a different trip, but I also went to Italy one time and went and took photos of myself all over the Spanish Steps. And that was only, I mean, tourists go to the Spanish Steps all the time, but for me, that was specifically because that's where Mario Bava set The Girl Who Knew Too Much. So, anyway, so yeah, big fan of all of that. But anyway, so getting back to whatever we're calling this film, let's call it Haunted Planet, just to really confuse people.
Just to confuse everyone, yes.
Yeah. So, should we talk just briefly about some of the main cast before I head into the plot synopsis? Because there are a couple of well-known names in the film this time. In a smaller role, somebody who would go on to become very significant in Italian cinema is Ivan Rasimov. It's pretty hard to watch any cult Italian movie these days without finding Ivan Rasimov in there somewhere.
True. We'll run across him again in the future of this particular series. But yes, he's got a very striking face. He's someone who, once you see him, I mean, we've talked before about Italian actors who turn up again and again in a lot of different films, and you immediately recognize them because of their very striking features. But he is one of those guys. So many Italian crime films in the 70s. Cult 38 Special Squad is absolutely one of my favorites, and The Tough Ones, and things like that. But he was also in Spasmo, which is just a really, really great film. The Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key, All the Colors of the Dark, Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. He's in a bunch of giallos and crime movies in the 70s. He became one of those guys who just he was ubiquitous to a degree. There's this joy in seeing him because you realize, your associations with him are of the type that you immediately make you glad to watch this guy again on the screen. Even though he's often playing pretty, especially in the 70s, sometimes he's playing pretty nasty characters.
Yeah, I mean, he's great as the villain in which one's it called? Eaten Alive. That's very good.
Yes.
Where he plays this kind of Jim Jones type character in this cult in the middle of the jungle. But then he's also in one of Ruggero Deodato's films, Ultimo Mondo Cannibale, or Last Cannibal World.
Yeah.
Didn't he also he did another one of those cannibal films?
He did Jungle Holocaust. The Umberto Lenzi film. Is that the one that's known as Jungle Holocaust? It's got so many different titles. I can't remember. I was surprised when he turned up in a couple of Emmanuel films in the 70s as well.
Deep River Savages was the film that I was thinking of, also called The Man from Deep River or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, Ivan Rasimov, we're obviously going to talk about him in a couple of episodes' time for his role as Darth Vader in The Humanoid, which is going to be fun. But yeah, so he's I think this film was one of his first. He's very early on, so he plays Carter, who doesn't have a lot of lines, but he gets to run around in one of these great suits, and then dies eventually. But the big name, the starring role, is Barry Sullivan, who's an actor that I'm not massively familiar with, but I think he was the kind of AIP casting. They wanted an American star.
Yeah.
So they got Barry Sullivan in. And was he somebody that you're familiar with from other things? Because he's not a name I know particularly well.
He's someone I knew from classic Hollywood films. He was in a number of movies that I've run across, in my voracious film eating appetite. Just the things like Bad Men of Tombstone. He played Tom Buchanan in the 1949 version of The Great Gatsby. He was just in a lot of movies. He was never, as far as I can tell, he was never a huge star, But he's quite a good actor, and he's one of those guys who obviously Hollywood could count on. I mean, he was in things like The Bad and the Beautiful and Cry of the Hunted, and he's a good actor who, by the time he did this film, had kind of gotten to the point where most of his career, he did the occasional film. By the late 50s, he was in things like Sam Fuller's 40 Guns and things of that nature, but he was doing a lot more television as well.
Yeah.
And so having shifted more into the television thing, which is primarily what he did in the late 60s all the way through the 70s, the fact that he ends up in an Italian production is not that much of a surprise. So he's someone who, he was never a big star on my radar, but he's definitely one of those guys who, once you start realizing what he was in, he's like, oh yeah, I've seen this guy in a dozen things.
I know he was a lot older than I think they wanted for their star. They wanted to have a kind of romantic leading man, and then he comes in and he's about 25 years older than the woman he's supposed to be having a relationship with. And I think there was some talk then of making her his daughter instead, but then they just kind of wrote all that out completely.
Yeah, I think getting rid of the romantic subplot in this film was probably a smart move, because that is always the kind of thing that's what actually I think turns out to be one of the best elements of this film from the perspective of someone who enjoys science fiction films of the 50s and 60s, is that those subplots always felt wedged in. It doesn't matter how adept the script writer might have been or how good the actors were. Those romantic subplots in a science fiction movie always felt just pointless. And so having decided, because of the age of the actor, I don't care what reason they gave to do away with it, it helps the movie, in my opinion, right off the bat.
Oh yeah, absolutely, because there are two women in the crew of the ship, and they what I thought was really interesting here is that they are mostly just crewmates. There's no, like you said, there's no romantic anything going on, and they're treated very much as equals. They're put on guard, they have jobs, they have guns. There's a little bit of screaming and then fainting, which is sort of unfortunate, but
is
by
the
and
60s
large,
after all.
Yeah, but by and large, it's really positive. I think that they're just treated very much as a member of the crew, not as a woman. Like the film that I thought of when I was watching this was coincidentally the other film that is often credited as being an inspiration for Alien, along with this one, which was The Terror from Beyond Space, or whatever it's called. Because I'm pretty sure in there's a female scientist who's a member of the crew, but all she ever does is make everybody cups of tea. She's like constantly the one who's bringing the coffee. You know, they just treat her as the woman on the crew who has to do all that while the men make the serious decisions. And what I liked here was that the women are just getting on with their jobs, and there's very little sexualization or romantic inclinations or anything like that. So you're right, it definitely works in the film's favor. So the two female leads, we've got an actress called Norma Bengal, who I believe was Brazilian, so I think she was brought in through the Spanish co-production, and then Evie Morandi, who to help tell the difference between these women, because everybody looks the same in their suits, you can only really tell who they are from their hairstyles and things. So you've got Evie Morandi, who's the blonde actress in the film, and then Norma Bengal is a kind of a red-headed actress. But I thought both of them were really good. I liked what they did in the film.
I like both of them as well.
Yeah, Evie Morandi was a Greek actress, but she'd been in a few Euro spy films and things like that, including one that I'm fairly familiar with because I wrote about it a lot in my PhD, called From the Orient with Fury, which I also named my blog after that, and there's a chapter in my PhD called From the Orient with Fury. So that film was pretty central, and so I was quite pleased to recognise her from that. So I guess she's just, like many of these people, they just come to Italy in the 60s and end up in hundreds of different kinds of films.
Well, I mean, these incredibly beautiful ladies, a lot of them, of course, moved over from modeling of one type or another into the film industry because, if you can even basically emote, then the Italian film industry could find a way to put a beautiful woman on screen for the obvious effect that they want from a beautiful woman. I'll be honest. I look at the films that she made. Her career kind of stopped around the 69 or 70. There was one more film she did in 1974, but it appears that she had her run in the film industry and then went on to do whatever else she intended to do. But I have to say, you just look at the string of movies she made from from The Orient with Fury, and you have several Eurospy films there. I look at the list of titles and I think, hey, that would be a really good film festival just to watch, just to follow her career, her small parts in these movies, just to see these 60s films. They're exactly the kind of thing that a woman like her would be used to enhance their Paris When It Sizzles. In 1964 she played Girl at Pool Number 2. Thank God she eventually graduated to be able to have dialogue. But
characters with names.
Yes, exactly. Not merely an ornament. But the both actresses, I think, acquit themselves quite well in this. I think it's interesting. We should point out, as Tim Lucas does in his book, that originally Susan Hart was supposed to play the role of Sonia, the character that was eventually played by Norma Bengal, and to the point where she actually she came to Italy thinking that she was going to be doing it. Of course, Susan Hart was the wife of one of the American producers, James Nicholson.
That was weird. I was reading about that story. So they got married. He saw her in a film, fell in love with her, hired her for, I think it was Pajama Party or one of those beach party films, and then he married her, and they went on their honeymoon and came straight to Rome from their honeymoon. But meanwhile, Sam Arkoff sabotaged the whole thing for reasons unknown and issued a statement that no employees or members of the families of employees of AIP could appear in films. Basically, it's like he made a rule specifically to stop her from being in any more AIP films.
Yeah.
Really weird.
I don't think it's as weird as you may think, because I think that that sounds to me a lot like a businessman realizing that his partner is about to start making decisions with the wrong part of his anatomy. And so maybe it's a good idea to establish a policy right up front, no matter how much strain it puts on the relationship. This is probably a good idea. Yeah,
that's fair enough. But it's a shame that they didn't tell her till she got there. But so what that meant was that they had to start shooting without a lead actress. It took a while to get Norma Bengal in, and so they were filming around her and the scenes that she was in and all kinds of things until eventually they were able to bring her in and finish the film. So it's amazing. This film is as good as it is when it was made under relatively chaotic conditions with very little money, with actors missing. They still didn't know what the end of the film was going to be. The script had been rewritten in 2 different languages several times. They still didn't know what it was called. It's a kind of a miracle that we got the film that we ended up with.
Well, this is not the first time that I've heard these kind of productions, these kind of chaotic productions, described as, let's just say the end product being described as a miracle that it came out as good as it was. Because a lot of film productions apparently are this way, because it's very easy to forget that for the people making these things, they're jobs of work. The situations that people encounter in their day-to-day job, imagine that being fitted around trying to craft a movie. All the little odds and ends, the problems that you run into daily and weekly at your regular job. And that's the kind of crap they run into there as well. Only a lot of this has to be visualized up on the big screen. And so all these, somebody ate too much lunch, and so they don't feel well enough to really have the energy for that scene they shot after lunch, or they had a fight with their wife or whatever that morning, and it affects the way they play a certain role, or it affects even some part of the crew. These are the kind of things that fold into this without it being, hopefully without it affecting the production too much. And I'll be blunt. The day I found out that they didn't really have an idea of exactly how they were going to end this thing while they were making it was a shock, because by then I had seen the movie and loved the ending. And so to not have known up front that you were going to go in that direction just seems madness to me, because it's just, and of course this is all 2020 hindsight, but to me it's the perfect ending.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. The ending is very close to Ibn Melchior's idea, but with less religious overtones, which I think is what Mario Bava perhaps didn't like. But let's talk about the plot, and then we'll get to the end and we can discuss that a bit more. So we begin with two spaceships, or we begin with some great electronic music, which I'll put in a little clip of here. Really interesting electronic score. Thankfully, this is one of the AIP films where they didn't just whiz it away to Les Baxter to completely take off the original score and stick some jazzy 60s thing on. So this is the proper score that Bava wanted, which I thought was good.
Yeah,
so anyway,
and it seems that the only reason that happened, that they kept the original score, was because they didn't have time to mess with it. So.
Well, yeah, which is a good thing. So we've got two spaceships, the Argos and the Galliot, which I think are sort of names from mythology. They've been sent to investigate a mysterious pulse signal emanating from the planet Aurora for at least the last 2 years. And the ships communicate with each other. And I love the way that he has these TV screens between the ships. And because most of the special effects in this film are done in camera, and in order to have his guys in one ship speak to the guys in the other ship, he basically just had the crew from the other ship standing behind the glass dome in the studio, and then the lights are off, and then they turn the lights on, and he can pretend there's a crew in a different spaceship, and then you turn the lights off again, and you've turned it off. I thought that was a very clever way of doing that in camera.
Oh, it's brilliant, and it's an effective, low budget way of doing it, and it also looks great and allows the actors to actually play off of each other.
Yeah, I mean most. I don't want to spend too much time because this podcast could end up being hours long, but pretty much all with one or two matte shots and process shots aside, most of the special effects were done in camera. And it's Bava using all of his skills that we've seen in films from Mask of Satan and
the Hercules movies.
And all of that sort of stuff. Anyway, so the two ships communicate. The Galliot is going to land first. For the Argos, our captain, his name is Mark Markery, which I thought it's only really a kind of spoonerism away from being Captain Marky Mark. So I might just call him Captain Marky Mark now.
Oh, don't do that. I'm going to have a mental break if you do that.
So anyway, so the Galliot lands, but they lose contact with them. So and Mark's brother Toby is on board the Galliot. Of course, it's his first mission. So he wants to go and land to find out what's happened to them. And they land, as they're landing onto the planet, they're suddenly overtaken by an immense gravitational force, which it seems to involve the actors just kind of moving very slowly and being lying on the floor.
Yeah, this is something that science fiction films, they often had to find a way to attempt to visualize people in space or people landing spacecrafts being affected by multiple G's, and it's the only really effective way to do it is to get that thing where we now know what astronauts look like when they're being affected by these kinds of G's, which is the force of it does kind of push your skin around a little bit, and that can be done pretty effectively by blowing high pressure wind into someone's face to kind of get that same pressurized reaction. But of course, back then, this is not something that they either knew or did. And so what you have is people acting as if someone's standing on their back or trying to press them into whatever surface that they're lying against as they attempt to move under such heavy G forces. But it's one of the things you have to give movies of this time, and I think they do it pretty well here.
Yeah, it goes on a bit, I think, that sequence. It seems to last a long time. But eventually they land, and as soon as they land, they all start beating each other up. Captain Mark seems to be the only person who's not affected, but everyone else just starts going crazy. And it would appear to be because they all went unconscious, but he didn't.
Right.
So they've kind of woken up and then started trying to fight each other. And one of them, the ship's doctor, he runs out of the ship without his helmet on, but then thankfully discovers that the atmosphere is actually fine and he can breathe. And then they all kind of wake up and they don't know what they were doing or why they were fighting each other. But so it's all a bit of a mystery. And so they find themselves on this alien, what we could say, haunted planet, with this eerie landscape of rocks. And I mean, it's basically some rocks, some smoke machine, and some purple and green lights, and that is it. And Bava manages to create this thing for a second.
Let's pause here for a second to point out the incredible storytelling effectiveness of the first chunk of this movie. We are given an incredible scenario, brilliantly and in a kind of creepy and exciting way. When we have this, whether the landing, the G-force section of the landing is effective or not, it does get the immediate aftermath where these people are attacking each other, and then as soon as there's enough physical pain inflicted on their body, they snap out of it. Whatever's controlling them can no longer control them. This whole section is a great setup. It is such an incredibly evocative, creepy, and the stakes are immediately elevated, because as soon as they realize what's going on, and the only reason that one of them wasn't affected is because he didn't pass out, he managed to not pass out during the landing, is it communicates so many possible tripwires for the cast as they go along, because they suddenly realize, oh wow, so is this going to happen if we go to sleep? Is this going to happen anytime any of us are quote unquote unconscious? And then the immediate realization, oh my God, this probably happened to the crew of the other ship as well, thereby immediately upping the tension. And it's just an incredibly well constructed opening to this entire section of the film. It works so well because each thing follows on from the next. You immediately get this progression. It's this stair-stepping up of tension and suspense, as with each revelation that, oh my God, this is not good. Oh my goodness, how does this affect that? And then at the same time, we're being constantly, once they're outside the ship, we also get all this incredible visual stuff. So it's almost too much at the beginning, where you're getting so much information. The story is presenting all of this stuff 1, 2, 3 at a time, and the audience is following along with these pieces of information at the maybe just a little bit ahead of the crew, maybe sometimes just a little bit behind, because they give voice to something that maybe you didn't think about as well. And then, oh my God, we've got to get to the other ship because no one's answering, and this probably happened to them as well. It's really effective stuff.
Yeah, so you made some really good points there, and it's a really good mystery that's set out right at the beginning. There's the mystery of who is it that's been sending this message, what's happened to the other ship, why are they fighting each other. There's a lot of questions raised with no immediate answers. But also as an additional mystery, the signal that they've been tracking for 2 years has suddenly stopped. now that they're actually there. And so they don't really know exactly what's going on, but they decide to go and look for the galliot, and they have to cross this mysterious, smoky, bubbling landscape. And that's when they find the other ship, and outside on the ground are some of the crew members who are all dead, with blooded faces, like they've beaten each other to death, basically. And that's obviously, they realise that the same thing that happened to them has happened to these guys. And they go into the ship and they find all the crew, they're all dead. And also they look around the ship, which is very helpfully identical to theirs, which means they only needed one ship set and not two.
Exactly.
Now, there's a bit of the ship that is really important to the whole thing. Without this bit of equipment, then they can't get anywhere. And it's called the meteor rejector, which I thought was a really interesting little bit of science fiction kind of jargon that they've come up with, that this vital piece of kit that you can unplug and take away and hide if you want to, but without it the ship will basically just get hit by a meteor and die.
Well,
but
I will say, did you notice, this is what I kept thinking even the first time I saw this movie, which is when you realize that it's something that can be unplugged and removed very easily. My thought was, this is such a vital piece of equipment. Don't they have like 2 or 3 spares in storage? But they don't. Because that would be the reason you would make it so easy to replace, is you've got, if this one goes bad, we've got another one,
So because the meteor rejector on the galliot has been smashed in half by somebody's head has been smashed against it. It looks like it's all covered in blood and broken. But yeah, you're right. They should just have a cupboard full of them. But so basically the galliot can never fly again, just because that bit is missing. Now it's broken, and they decide to bury the crew because they found all the bodies except for a couple who are missing. So they bury them using twisted wreckage from the ship. But what I thought was interesting is we don't see it. When we see the ship, it all looks fine. Like, we don't see it twisted and broken. But yet they somehow have got twisted wreckage to use to bury the crew.
In reading the details from some of the Lucas book, it's clear that this image, the image of using this kind of these broken bits from the crashed ship, that was something that it was one of the visuals that Bava definitely leaned heavily into and wanted to include in the movie. Yeah,
it looks great.
Yeah,
it looks really, really good. So they're buried, and their ship is damaged, although thankfully their meteor rejector is fine. But something wrong with their battery, so they haven't got enough power to take off, I think, is the main problem. And they're going to have to stay there for possibly a couple of days, although time seems to act
there's
strangely.
some repairs that have to get done.
And there's a great bit where I can't remember. You know more about Star Trek than I do. Are we talking prime Star Trek here, or is this before Star Trek?
This is just before Star Trek. Star Trek started being shown on television in 1966, so the year after this.
This is before, because the sort of landscape that they're walking across in this planet, that's studio bound planetary landscape, it would work very well in an episode of Star Trek. But also we see Captain Marky Mark talking to the ship's log.
Bastard.
He's it's like the ship's log, captain's log, stardate, whatever, and he's telling he's retelling it, how he's recording this thing about how bad everything is and how scared he is, but he's got to stay really brave so that he doesn't panic the rest of the crew. And then he's about to say the year, but he just gets cut off, so we don't find out what year this is set, which I thought was a funny little kind of tease.
And of course, it's a great payoff, because that scene is absolutely fantastic in that it also gives us, first of all, yes, we don't find out quote unquote what year it is, but it also hides one of the revelations that we get at the very end of the film.
Because I think, doesn't it say on the poster, is this 10,000 years before or 10,000 years after or something? There's like
they're kind of gutting their ending there by using that in some kind of advertisement for the film.
But so we might as well say this now. So the original ending that Ib Melchior wrote was that there are 2 surviving members of the crew, and they've been taken over by ghosty aliens, which we'll talk about soon. and they end up having to crash land on a nearby planet because of the meteor rejector problem. And that planet turns out to be Earth, and they turn out to be Adam and Eve. And so it is actually like 10,000 years plus before now. And these guys were never human in the first place. They're from a different race, and they're going to now... So mankind, I think the idea was that...
It's ancient aliens, man.
Yeah, that you've got the sort of human side, but you've also got the soul, and the soul is the ghost aliens from this planet, which we'll talk about more soon, and that together they become humans. And so yeah, so that was the original ending, which Mario Bava didn't like, and they kind of eventually did come up with a compromise, which we'll get to. So anyway, so he's panicking, but he can't tell anybody how scared he is. He's ordered that nobody can go to sleep without being watched over by somebody else. Yeah. Which, being watched while you sleep, that's quite weird in itself.
But on this planet, necessary.
Yes. And so, meanwhile, there's this great sequence now when we go back to the graves, and the crew, in sort of slow motion as the smoke drifts across the graves, they open up, and these dead crewmates who've been put into plastic bags kind of rise up in slow motion and tear off the plastic. And they're all kind of zombified. And Planet of the Zombies would also have been a good title for the film based on this bit.
That's true.
But I think this scene is obviously one of the key moments of the movie. Everything about the way that it's shot in the slow motion, and the sound, and the smoke and the plastic bags, everything about it is just so great. It's a really good moment.
Every time I watched this movie before I got the chance to read the details of the production in the Lucas book, I always wondered, when watching the movie, about how amazing the mist is in these planetscapes, and then to learn that it's not just one type of thing. That while they were making the movie, they used both mist from dry ice and kind of the movie fog smoke stuff that they use in movies, and one would adhere closer to the floor, and one would drift a little up into the air, which is what gives you so many of these shots where you have, like you say, in this creepy, even in slow motion, it becomes this creepy thing where there seem to be mists that are moving in ways that other pieces of mist in the same shot aren't moving. It's one of those unearthly things that's just brilliant. And the fact that it was achieved simply by combining two different everyday things it's wonderful. It just makes me love the movie that much more.
I believe that they used a similar effect in the film that's sometimes called Horror Hotel, or City of the Dead, the Christopher Lee film.
Great stuff.
And with that one, the smoke is like it should have its own credit.
I know. There are times when it seems to be following people and wrapping around corners at times.
And that's a similar thing. They use 2 or 3 different forms of fog to create that effect of it doing different things at different levels of the close to the ground, up in the sky. So it is done really well here. It turns out that they've all risen from the ground, and eventually we find out that they're sort of possessed by the Aurans, whoever it was that used to live on this planet, and the planet is dying. I think their sun is dying, and so they're the ones who've been putting out this signal to try and attract people to their planet, so that they can steal their bodies and then steal their ships and go to another planet to start again. That's basically what we find out is going on. But there's a lot. The thing is the plot is good for this movie, but describing the plot on its own doesn't really do it justice, because like you were just saying, it's so much about the visuals. It's almost like the dialogue is pretty cheesy a lot of the time. The plot is okay, but what really matters is the look of the thing. So just talking about the plot doesn't do it justice.
Yeah, the story is great. It's a great science fiction / horror story. I will agree with you that the weakest element of it is some kind of pedestrian dialogue at times, kind of generic dialogue that could have honestly been punched up. And
yeah, it's not great. And obviously, I think there was a certain level of improvisation as well, particularly by Barry Sullivan, who's obviously got this script that's been written and rewritten and translated and things so many times that I think there was a certain level of just certain lines not really making any sense. Plus, you've got some people doing their lines in English, some in Spanish, some in Italian. Yeah. And so, it doesn't totally work. But anyway, it's the visuals. So at some point here, we get Sanya and Captain Mark. They decide to go out in search of answers because they've spotted something shiny in the distance, another potential ship, and they think maybe there are some answers there. And this is where we get to probably one of the main reasons why this film is often compared to Alien, which is that they find a long crashed ship by another alien race, but a race of giants, much bigger people. And we see these fabulous skeletons of this race of people who'd crashed on Aura and then died there, and they've clearly been there a very long time based on the fact that the ship is all rusted up, and there's a skeleton lying on the ground. But the captain still says something like, "You can tell by the calcification of the bones that they've been here a really long time," or something trite like that. And it's like, well, yeah, you can also tell because they're bones and that they're buried in the mud. And this ship is clearly,
there's dirt and dust all over them. Yeah.
This ship isn't going anywhere. That they've been here a long time. I'm not sure you need to analyse the bones particularly, but they go aboard the ship, and this is where you get this great sequence. They're exploring this crashed alien ship.
Oh, it's amazing! Yes, this is a great sequence, and probably this is probably the sequence that would have guaranteed this movie a place in the imagination of a lot of people. This sequence alone was probably worth the price of admission for anybody.
Yeah, no, it's really great. Obviously, this is where there's a lot of comparisons made between this film and Alien, although of course Ridley Scott always claimed never to have seen this one.
Well, he wouldn't have had to have seen it because
he didn't write it.
This comes from the screenwriters.
Yeah, he never wrote Alien, so it's perfectly possible that those guys did.
Oh, they did. They were flat out honest about it.
I mean, they did they? Okay.
Oh yeah. They were very clear about that because this sequence is obvious. Plus, let's be clear. I mean, the entire reason people are on this people come to this planet in the first place is identical in both movies. I mean, there's a signal that they can't interpret, but that appears to be some kind of distress call in both movies. That's what draws the crew down to the planet's surface in the first place.
Yeah, and I suppose the difference here is that in Alien they discover that the signal was actually a warning telling people not to come, whereas here it's the Aurans themselves who've lured them here.
Yes.
And so what happened with these giant aliens, we're never really sure, because presumably the Aurans must have tried to use them, but maybe their ship was too badly damaged when it crashed. Maybe the aliens died in the crash or something. But the Aurans clearly, it turns out the Aurans have been luring people to here for years to try and get the perfect hosts to be able to escape. So finally, with Captain Mark and his gang and the crew of the Galliot, they finally got the bodies they need to be able to leave. But yeah, so in the meantime, I'm skipping over. So Mark and Sanya, they're trapped. They get stuck in this alien kind of, I don't know what it is, not the engine room. They're in the galley, would you call it? Bridge. Let's call it the bridge. They're in the bridge, I think. It's like the main control room for the ship.
Right.
And they managed to reactivate it so things start moving, doors close behind them, all the air starts getting sucked out. I'm not entirely sure why that would be a thing that you would need in a spaceship to be able to suck all the air out.
Well, anyway. I'm assuming it has something to do with preparations for the ship to take off. You're kind of battening down the hatches to some degree.
That's true.
But who knows? These are aliens, man.
These are aliens. So, but there's a great bit as well. It's really creepy where they somehow turn on a recording and you're hearing this alien language being spoken, and it's this kind of guttural, very deep sounds that are really spooky, and it freaks them out. It probably freaks the audience out as well. Yeah. And they have to figure out how to escape before they run out of breath and they eventually find a button that opens the door and they manage to get out. But in the meantime, their own crew are all slowly getting killed off. It becomes a bit of a slasher film from this point of view. And there's lots of, okay, we're going to go and explore in here. You wait out here on your own and stay guard. And every time I was thinking, no, don't make people stand on their own and keep guard, because you're never going to see them again. It's just classic. You wait here while we go and do this thing. Oh, look, he's dead. That happens quite a lot in this film. And gradually their crew are all just getting killed off. And also some of the crew claim to have seen dead, former colleagues. And they're not sure whether to believe them.
Yeah, everybody seems to be getting a lot unnerved, so it's hard to know if these sightings or these fears that they're experiencing are something that's just being generated by their anxiety and their terror, or if there's something that something real that's causing them. So yeah. And then the two missing bodies from the crew of the Galliot finally turn up, and then they those two are, we've got Captain Salas and Kia, two members of that crew. They turn up and they seem fine, so they let them in. But of course, we know that they're not fine. They're actually now possessed by the aliens as well. And there's a great moment when one of them accidentally opens up his suit, and you see that his chest is all kind of ripped open and rotted. And he's clearly dead. And that's when now, at least finally, Captain Mark gets to talk to an Auran through this dead crew member, Captain Salas, and he explains to him what was going on, what's happened, why they're trying to leave, and he offers him a kind of compromise. I mean, what did you think of the Auran offer of sharing their bodies? Seems fair, right? Yeah, and not something I would have taken them up on, because it just seems like a bad trade, because I don't know what I'm going to get into. But it is fascinating because, first of all, you can understand the appeal, because these people are aware now that there aren't many of them left and they could just be easily killed. But at the same time, the kind of Faustian bargain that's being offered here, I think is fascinating to contemplate from the perspective of, well, this is really the only option open right now. We can either destroy ourselves, everybody can lose, or we can find a way to compromise. And it's just a question of, is this a compromise you're willing to make?
Yeah. It's like basically everybody dies or everybody survives, but the survival option may not actually be that great after all.
It may be something that you really don't want.
Yeah. So meanwhile, Captain Mark has got a plan. He's going to use some nuclear thermodynamic devices or something. They've got some nuclear timers that they've just happened to have in a cupboard. They've got loads of nuclear bombs in a cupboard, basically.
Well, you don't have any?
No, not today.
Oh,
I need to pop out and get some more.
Yeah, they do.
They've only got one meteor ejector, but they've got loads of nuclear bombs. So
fair point.
They realise that the Aurans are going to try and fly the Galliot, so they've got to bomb that ship to make sure that it can't take off. They've got to explode that one and then escape in their ship. So that's their plan now. They're basically down to about 3 people. There's Wes, played by Angel Aranda, and then Captain Mark and Sanya. They're the only ones left. So they go and they manage to destroy the other ship quite effectively, even though Captain Mark sees his dead brother in that ship. But so that's a bit of a sad moment for him. But then he blows it up anyway, and they get back to their ship. And Wes has been tasked with fixing the batteries. He's got it ready. He's going to take off. They're going to leave the Aurans behind. And they do. They take off. They get out of Auran atmosphere into space, and everything's fine, right?
Oh yeah, that's the end of the film. It's a happy ending. It's great.
So and it's a really interesting ending. So they think it's kind of a false happy ending. We think everything's fine, But then Wes starts to notice that Captain Mark is acting a bit suspiciously, and so he takes his suspicions to Sanya, which was perhaps not a good idea.
True. But then again, unfortunately, it does turn out that there was no good option for Wes at that point, no matter what.
No. I mean, are we okay to we can spoil the ending, can't we?
Folks, if you are unaware of this movie and you haven't watched it before, I think we may have probably already kind of spoiled the movie, but I guess we're going to dive headlong into it here and just state some things outright. So be aware.
Yeah. I mean, it is available. This is a great film. I think this is the first movie we've done so far that's on Blu-ray, so you can get this, and you should. I kind of wish that the Blu-ray actually had the Italian language track, or because I believe there was a slightly different edit for the Italian release.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Release. The credits were definitely different, but the Blu-ray currently only has the full American version. But either way, definitely get it and watch it. So the ending then. So Wes discovers, to his great horror, that he is the last human left on the ship. That Captain Mark and Sanya are both. We're not sure whether they're dead, or if they have agreed to be co-symbiote hosts,
right,
or something a bit like Venom, like,
or if the Aurans have found some way to take them over regardless.
Yeah, because they don't look dead.
No,
but so maybe they're not dead. But so we've just got two Aurans and Wes. And Wes realizes, okay, I've got to stop them from getting to my home planet, because the whole thing has been that we don't want to get to the home planet because they will just take over and destroy everything and make it all Auran.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's so what does he have to destroy if he's going to stop them getting home? Of course, the most fragile piece of equipment that they only have one of,
for some reason,
the meteor rejector. And there's a great shot, which is actually in the trailer. Talk about spoilers. The shot of Wes smashing the meteor rejector is in the trailer for the film.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's right.
So he dies. He sadly gets electrocuted and dies, but he's made this noble sacrifice to save his home planet. So this leaves Captain Mark, or what used to be Captain Mark, this leaves the two of them now to have to think about what to do. We'll never make it to their home planet, or never make it to their planet. We'll have to land on the nearest planet. So they look out the telescope, and what do they see? The Earth. The little blue planet is very primitive. It's so backward, it's not on any of their charts, apparently. And they use their super telescope to look at New York. And they say, they're so primitive, they're still
they're still making buildings out of
stone.
Yeah. And what I love is that by inserting that dialogue and that shot of modern New York, they definitely avoid the Adam and Eve problem. So. Yeah.
So that was the compromised ending that they came up with, that they still end up on Earth, which I think is a great idea, because that really pulls the rug out, because the whole time you've just assumed this is a human crew from the future on a space mission, but actually no, they're from a different planet entirely. But actually, it's a little bit of a Twilight Zone thing. I'm pretty sure there's an episode of the Twilight Zone where there's an impending nuclear war, and some guys who've got access to the rocket program get their families and they steal a rocket and go into space before the Earth is destroyed by before their planet, I should say, is destroyed by nuclear war.
Yeah.
And it ends up that the planet they are flying to for refuge is Earth. And that's the big twist at the end of the.
And that kind of twist, that's the perfect example of, or one of the perfect examples of this film's story's kind of origin. This comes from classic pulp science fiction stuff. This is the kind of thing that variations on stories of this type were popping up in science fiction pulp magazines as far back as the 30s. This is, at this point, for a science fiction lunatic, who read voraciously, this would not have been that new a concept or that new a story.
No.
No matter how impressed you may have been as a film goer in 1965, a science fiction reader would have run across this kind of thing multiple times.
Yeah, sure.
And it's great because this is this is a pulp story. This is a great science fiction / horror story, and it is exactly the kind of thing that would have just popped off the page to anybody reading this stuff. It would have been beautiful, because these are you can go back to the origins of so many different things. I mean, like Who Goes There, the short story that was turned into The Thing from Another World in 1951. Its origins are in the pulp stories of the time, and there once again you have this horror story, this horror science fiction story that has this great idea at its core, but it's also far from the first or last time that such a story was being told.
Yeah.
And so this kind of thing, sadly, this movie wasn't as profitable as everybody hoped it would be, especially in Italy, which is a real shame, because I would love to have seen Italian science fiction, the whole industry, just kind of turn its sights for a year or two on mining the pulp science fiction stuff, because Italy had its own pulp science fiction stuff at the same time. It wasn't just an American or British bit of fiction subculture. It's something that was burgeoning all over the planet, and to have been able to have a success out of this movie, to see some more of this kind of story being brought to the screen, I doubt it would have been done as beautifully or as effectively as Bava was able to do it, of course.
Yeah.
But the pulp origins of this point to a missed sidetrack for Italian exploitation. This is a rarity. There are very few Italian science fiction films in the 60s, and because they didn't make money for whatever reason, or they didn't make enough money, I guess we should say. It's not like the Eurospy thing, which went on for about 5 years, and it's not like the Sword and Sandal thing, which went on for 5 or 6 years or 7 years, and it's definitely not like a lot of the different genres, especially not the spaghetti western genre, which went on forever. Yeah. But the missed opportunity here, the thing that you'd like to have seen an alternate path taken, is just, wow, pulpy science fiction tales like this being done for a few years. Of course, then we would end up with fewer Eurospy films probably, but
true. And particularly films like this, obviously this is quite a serious, although on the surface it's pretty schlocky but there's quite a sort of serious philosophical thing going on here, and it's a little bit Invasion of the Body Snatchers as well. And there's some interesting philosophical concepts going on which go back to the original story, which there was an English translation of the story called Night of the Id, which reminds you a little bit of something like Forbidden Planet as well. It's this sort of whole psychological aspect of the whole thing. Obviously,
of course, the score for this movie seems to play very heavily on the score done for Forbidden Planet as well.
What we ended up with instead is what we're going to get to next time, which is the Gamma 1 films, which are far more comic booky than this one. Less serious. There's no the horror elements are toned down a good deal in those movies. Yeah. So I had a look, and Planet of the Vampires did get a release here in the UK, but not until 1968. So it took 3 years to come out here. But Mario Bava's name was fairly well known amongst British reviewers at that point, and the review is pretty good. It says, "This might be described as the triumph of mind over matter, or of Bava over a shoestring budget and appalling dubbed dialogue. Given little more to work on than a handful of wooden actors peering agitatedly at papier-mâché rocks and muttering, 'Quick, let's get out of here,' or, for variation, 'Let's get out of here quick.' He does atmospheric wonders with pastel-shaded ground fogs and cunning camera work. Somehow, Bava manages to maintain a real sense of menace throughout, in spite of the struggle for survival against the cast's repeated and plaintive cries of, 'What is going on?'" And I think that's fair enough. I would agree. It's a fair assessment of the film. But. Yeah, and it also got quite a wide US release, and I found the Variety review, which is pretty positive. Describes the color, camera work, and production value as smooth and first class. It calls the acting adequate, which is fair enough again, I think. And it says the story is a bit heavy-handed. I don't think so. Again, and it refers to quite a lot of the sort of gory details of we didn't really mention that, but some of the close-ups of their faces when they're all battered and dead is quite, considering this was probably shown, at least in America, I would imagine this would be aimed at a kind of more younger audience.
Probably.
It's pretty graphic. I mean, in the UK it had an X certificate, so this would have been 16 and over here. So it's Variety says anyway, as a psychological thriller, the main promise pays off, but the ending is not to be believed. Which,
well, I mean,
taken it. They're a bit offended by that ending. That somehow,
I guess so. Yeah.
This is now they've come to America. But this is obviously, this is possibly one of the best films that we're going to be doing in this whole season. I think it's fair to say. This is
agree.
It's the one stone cold classic of all the 10 films that we're covering. And
well, I mean, for me, it's one of my favorite Mario Bava films. I know that real aficionados kind of look upon this as not one of his best films, and the thing is, I mean, maybe technically or across the board on every level, it's not. But to be honest, it's my second favorite Bava film. My favorite Bava film is Danger Diabolic, and this is my second favorite. I mean, I've rewatched those two films more than a lot of his other movies that I think are probably better, just because they appeal to me in a particular way. The beauty of this film to me is that it is one of the best. It's as if someone watched the American science fiction movies of the 1950s and decided, well, let's make a scary one. And that's all. I mean, to be honest, that's exactly what I want. I love the fact that it does feel exactly like what it pretends to be, and it does it just as effectively as they possibly could, and in most cases actually outdoing what I would have expected a film of this vintage to be able to do. I absolutely love this movie. As far as a classic, yes, obviously it's a classic, and one could nitpick here and there, which of course we did and do, but that's true of almost any film, of course. But
it's done with love. It's an affectionate ribbing.
Yeah, this is a great film. I love this movie every time I watch it, especially in the age since we've gotten it in high def. I just find more to enjoy about it every time I watch it, and I've watched it in excess of a dozen times in my life.
Yeah, no, it is. It's superb, and I hope everybody who is listening has also seen this one, or at least will now go out and watch it. And like I said, even if we've spoiled the plot a little bit, the plot is not really the important thing here. It's very much just sort of bathing in Mario Bava's visual style and just marveling at what he pulled off on such limited resources.
I think the budget for this was something like $200,000.
Or well, I mean, Tim Lucas mentions that, but he thinks it was probably even less because it looks like it cost less. But no, it's very impressive for what he did. Thank you everybody for joining us again. This is a bit of a longer episode this time than normal, but I think the film justifies it.
Certainly.
Thank you, Rod, for your input. You've seen this film a lot more than I have, and your insight has been very helpful. Why don't you let us know, everybody, what you think of this film? You can tweet us. We're also on Instagram, or you can email us as well, or leave us a review and tell us what you think there. All of those things would be very good. Our contact information is all in the show notes. So next time, as I've kind of teased up at the beginning of this episode, we are doing Wild Wild Planet. So I'm sure next time I will also get the name of the podcast wrong, because that film will have been something that is on my mind a lot by the time we get to that one. But anyway, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Rod, for doing this.
Glad to do it.
We'll talk to you all again soon. Bye.
Bye.